I would like to ask you to describe your profession.
So I want to start
I'm an
out
artist.
with 5 points. That specifically brought you to New York this time. Can you kind of give me a background of what the whole deal with 5 points is and what's going on with you and other artists?
Sure. As of now, we're in a case, so we can't discuss too many of the details within the case. But generally, back in November 2013, which was the last time I painted at the 5 Points location before the building was demolished, it was a celebratory piece between me and Mears that, I've been painting there since 1993. So it was about 20 years since I, had a chance to paint my last piece before the building came down, which we didn't know. And so a couple of months, I think just a few days after or weeks, the building was completely whitewashed by the owner. And
When did that happen? Do you remember like the month and the...
I believe that might have happened because I painted it in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Summer of what year?
In like May 2013 of that year.
All right.
And that same year, the whitewash happened, I believe, on November 19th. And so it was a couple of months after I had painted it with Mears. And so, and then the building came down like 10 months later. And so it was this whole big deal. A lot of people were very, sad about the whole thing because 5 Points no longer existed. It was disrespected, and we all felt all kinds of ways, which you could Google, the entire whitewash of what happened that day. And like New York Times covered it and Daily News. So there's a lot of details on there that you could read about what happened.
Just briefly, what was the point of whitewashing the building? Like, why did they do that? Just to sort of end any sort of pushback from the artists and the community? Just like end the conversation, basically?
I think that, when you own property, you can do, what you want with it. But unfortunately, there's a federal law called VERA that we are supposed to have a notice because it is our artwork, and there should be a mutual communication and respect for us to get notice in case we want to photograph it and do other things with the piece. And so we didn't get that. It was just like overnight, kind of like a vandalism over our work. And
Say the name of the law again.
It's called VERA.
VERA?
Yes.
And when did you guys discover that law existed? Was it long after the whitewashing?
Very much so. I mean, a lot of artists maybe had no idea of this law, but we learned through it after all these things were happening.
Okay.
Legal things started to pop up, and we found out there was an actual law that gave us rights, and so that propelled us to proceed further.
So now, I mean, it is the case basically that you have a group of artists looking to seek compensation from the developer because of the fact that he violated this law?
I can't really discuss those details, yeah.
So no, you can't go into details, but can we say at least that you are, there's a case going on?
There's a case going on for sure, and there's about 21 artists involved. And, 5 Points meant a lot to all of us. We've been painting there since we were kids, like teenagers. And so we helped build something that was a destroyed property, and then we made it something. And, it was just a beautiful thing, and it would have been nice to just communicate with the owner to do something, It was a touchy subject because, he wanted to, the neighborhoods all over New York City are high-rise luxury buildings now, like gentrification, and so the arts adds to the value of that, and so it was only right that we would come to a mutual understanding of something on each part.
Yeah. It sounded. I just recall it just being, everything just happened so fast.
Yeah.
Like happens in New York. I feel like sometimes when a developer sets his mind that I'm going to, money, people.
Yeah.
They'll do anything for money. It's crazy. So now I want to switch because you mentioned painting as a young person.
Yes.
Just tell me a little bit about your background, TooFly. Where were you born?
So I was born in Ecuador, in
Mhm.
this little town called Ibarra, which is like a lot of indigenous communities live there. And in 1985, my family migrated to the United States, and I went straight into Corona, Queens, and that's the neighborhood I grew up in.
All right. So, do you want to say what age you were when you came here?
I was about 7 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when do you first remember becoming interested in street art?
So I feel that growing up in New York, you're surrounded by, in that time or in that era, there was a lot of street bombing and graffiti on trains and rooftops and walls. The subway era of the colorful graffiti had been passed already. It happened in 1980, and so I wasn't here to see any of that. I just saw it in books, actually, as I was growing up and as a teenager. And so when I attended
The
the
trains
high
were cleaned
school,
up by the time you came here?
yes.
Oh, they were?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a couple of grimy trains inside, but they were completely clean on the
Transformed,
outside.
yeah.
And a lot of that stuff wasn't as colorful in Queens, or I just saw bombing. Like, I came into the era of like graffiti bombing and street tagging and like silver tags and, fill-ins and outlines and a couple of characters here and there. And I was already 15, 16 being introduced to that culture and that energy in high school, because I went to high school with a couple of graffiti writers. And so a particular artist named Save was a big influence on me, because he would do these big characters on like the walls and the tables at school with markers. And so I started to do that. And so it was my first
What age were you when you started?
action, like 15,
All right.
16. My first action of creating a character on like a wood table, which would be amazing to have these today.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's where we're at now, but back then we were just like hanging out and drawing. And so yeah, that's just kind of how it started, and I kept tagging and painting and doing it illegally for a little while, but then I was like, this is kind of dangerous. I'm not trying to go out at night. My mom would take me out bombing, and she didn't want me to hang out with the guys. But I really just wanted to start doing full color aerosol art. And so that's when 5 Points, at the time called Fun Factory, allowed us permission to paint. And then the rest is pretty much history, because that's where it all begins for me. In 1993, after I already have my name, my little street cred, and it just grows from there.
Right behind you is one of your prints that I purchased from you. I was looking at the emails, TooFly. It was like 10 years ago. Who is she?
So TooFly for me is a character and a name that represents fly girl, a beat girl. We grew up with hip hop culture, and I used to write these words on my notebook, like too fly, too fresh, too cool, whatever. And my friends, my guy friends, used to be like, you need to stick to TooFly. And I was like, it sounds conceited. And they're like, nah, that shit sounds dope. Just like write that. That's your tag. And I was like, all right, that's my tag. And so it became this world, just being inducted into the culture, creating a character that was influenced by the mug face of hip hop culture graffiti characters, and turn it into
What do you mean by the
fly girl.
mug face?
Well, there's a classic in history graffiti. They're the mug face, which is like the very slanted eyebrow, and like it's like Ken Swift or like those green, like doing these like b-boy characters, really the guy figures in breakdancing. And so I feel like it's an influence from there. I didn't realize and put it together until later on, but that's where a lot of these influences come from, like the high eyebrow, the high cheekbone.
Is her name TooFly too?
I feel like TooFly represents everything that I create, the character, the world, like where she came from, where she grew up. And then like now it's actually turning into the love warrior. So it's kind of like a story I'm telling, or through the series.
One of the things that I think is so amazing about TooFly is that you actually physically put women into street art where they aren't super duper represented, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was growing up in those teen years, there was other graffiti women
Mhm.
that were bombers. So
Mhm.
like Miss Mags, Claw, or like Jackie. Like, you know, you would see them, but it was like those silver, white, black. You know, just like bombing and street graph. And I did a little bit of that. I tried to do my character out there, but I just feel like she had too much detail. And I did some outlines and all that. I wasn't having fun with this whole street bombing thing, even though it was so edgy and so underground. I wanted to literally take 5, 10 hours and paint something. So I had to go the street art direction, which at the time wasn't called street art. It was just, you know, your graffiti piece, you know, because graffiti pieces were full color letter pieces. But I
Okay,
was
so there
doing
was bombing and then
characters.
creating like a full mural piece type.
Right. And
Okay.
so because there wasn't that many women, I wanted to now be that woman. Like, and then of course I learned of Lady Pink and her history, but I wanted to be for that time the female version of what the guys were doing,
Mhm.
but represent it through like a very female perspective.
How do you feel like how like back then, how did people respond to there being such a like clearly feminine presence in your street art? Like, do you feel like sometimes that sort of presence receives the same sort of pushback that women do in real life? Like, maybe I'm being too sort of philosophical, but I don't know. I
I
mean,
mean, I received a little bit of everything. Basically, in the beginning,
mm,
they're like, "Oh my God, there hasn't been a dope female artist in the scene for a minute, maybe
mm-hmm,
since Lady Pink, right?" Although the girls were just bombing, but it wasn't like this full color illustrative characters that were fly girls. You know, the guys were like falling in love with these girls on
okay,
black books, and they saw it on walls at last, like when I painted publicly, and they just couldn't believe it, and they were like, "Oh, Spanish girls painting these characters, and like she's dope and cool," and like they were all very respectful
mm-hmm,
and like embracing of what I was doing,
mm-hmm,
but most of them just wanted to like be my boyfriend and just like wanted me, you know, and they were all just trying. I was like not down for that because
right.
I wanted to get my respect for my skills and what I was doing, and I knew that from the very beginning just because of the way that I've been raised, and I never wanted to get involved in like any of that whole nonsense of being somebody's graffiti girl. And they put me on. I was like, oh hell no. I'm
Okay.
letting them know that I'm on here doing it on my own. I'm teaching myself. I'm not letting anyone put me on. Like, I was just like, it's all me. Like, I don't want nobody to claim that they put me on.
Which is
So
it's a harder path. Would you do you think it's a harder path, or
it's
am
a
I?
hard path because then eventually, you know, again, like the guys gave me respect, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why I was in crews or like groups of people, like big names, and you know, from the Bronx graffiti known. You look at old articles or groupings, you know, they had me with all of those greens and the Futuras and like the Bronx graffiti people, and they had me in those groupings, but I felt so uncomfortable. I just like, they were so tough. They were so like paranoid about like what's up. You couldn't just hang out and have a good time. Like
Mm,
everything had to be, you know, you don't know where I live, and like you don't know my
mm.
real name, and like I couldn't build with that. It felt very tough, and so that's why when I met Lady Pink and she invited me to paint on an all-female wall, that's when everything
When
changed.
was that?
That was in 2003.
All right.
So like 10 years later after painting, she invited us, and that's when I felt like, okay, they were still a little bit underground, like you can't really know where we're at, and it just kind of, you know, because it was illegal. But then you build with other women, and I just flipped the script. I was like, we're just gonna start doing these hip hop events and, you know, breakdancing events, and we're gonna just start painting there and just representing as women. And from the very beginning, I just felt so much more comfortable. We could paint flowers, we could paint pink, and like, you know, we didn't have to be these tough girls undercover and like, you know, nobody knows my name. I didn't like that. I come from like a community feel vibe, and so when I was able to feel that and do that, that's the direction I took.
Like you created your own sort of
Like
female
sisterhood or
crew, yeah,
something.
with its own set of rules. Yeah, I've always thought like we always talk about superheroes are always like masculine and single-minded, and they have no empathy. And I feel like a true feminine superhero would be like maybe super empathetic, you know, and building teams and things like that. So that's interesting that that sort of changed everything for you, that you could sort of flourish in an environment that you felt comfortable with people-wise. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's like we had the platform, but then it was up to, it wasn't going to just, it's diversity. We live in a city that's so diverse. So there was room, we were creating, so there was room to create anything you wanted. So we just created it, and then that's what it became, which was pretty cool. Like,